Hello, I'm Yoram Hazony, and this is NatConTalk, where nationalism and conservatism meet. Today I'll be speaking with Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She is a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and author of many books, including Heretic and her new book, Pray, Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, welcome to NatConTalk.
Yoram, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure on our side and actually a great honor. I think most of our viewers by now know at least a little bit about your story. You're one of the courageous figures of our time, born in Somalia, raised in Saudi Arabia and Kenya, fled an arranged marriage when you were young to the Netherlands, where you became a major public figure. Your partner in making a movie, Theo van Gogh, was murdered by Islamic extremists, and then you came to the United States, where you've had this brilliant career as an author and a public speaker on Islamic and all sorts of other public issues. Now at the Hoover Institution, so there's many things that we could talk about. Let's start with your new book. You have a book that is just a few weeks away. It's already available on pre-order. It's called Pray, Immigration, Islam, and the Erosion of Women's Rights. It can be pre-ordered. Will be out in a few weeks. And so let's begin by talking about immigration, which is something that you've discussed more and more in the last few years. What do you have to say about immigration policies and the immigration debate in Western countries?
So my stance on immigration, I've written extensively about this. My stance on immigration is that it has to be a social contract between the immigrant and the host society, that the host society has laws and traditions and norms. And I'm an immigrant from Somalia through, I came via different countries, but having come to America, of course, I come with the understanding that there are norms and laws that I should follow and that I have to respect that I'm allowed in legally, and that once I'm inside the country, I try my very best not only to take up the opportunities that America offers me, but to try and contribute to the country. Now, ideally, that is what everyone would do. But we've seen in the last few decades that that's not how it works. There is a cost to unplanned, ad hoc immigration. And what I've seen in the last few decades is that that cost falls on the shoulders of the poor, of the people with low income who live in neighborhoods and in communities that are already challenged. And when I use the word challenged, what I mean is communities and neighborhoods that are struggling to find healthcare, that are struggling to find education for their children, that are struggling to establish law and order in host societies. And these communities are struggling. And when the newcomers, the immigrants or the emigres, when they come in, they are placed in those communities. And the people who are doing it, the elites, the ones who are saying, why don't we have open borders? They seem to only take what is beneficial, what comes with open borders, but they don't seem to pay the cost. And they're either oblivious to it, or they don't care, or they're cynical about it. One of the prices, an unintended consequence, is the subject of Pray. Pray, the book that thank you very much, Yoram, that you've just drawn everyone's attention to, is we have young men coming from places where there is disorder and lawlessness, and where, from a cultural perspective, they are used to seeing women as commodities and treating them as such. And they come to Europe, and it's affecting the lives and the lifestyles of women living in Europe in general, but especially those in what you would call working class neighborhoods and communities and schools. And no one is shining a light on that. And it really it's some of these things that you have to talk about when you say, what is the price of this ad hoc, unplanned, chaotic immigration? What is the price of saying will have our borders open.
Well, so if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting that there's a particular issue with Islamic immigration. How do you think you can justify, or does it need to be justified at all, treating one group of immigrants in any way differently from another group of immigrants? As you know, in the United States, there was a great legal shift on this issue in the 1960s, where prior to that, there had been a norm of emphasizing immigration from European countries and other countries that were perceived as being culturally closer to America. And in the 1960s, that was then considered to be racist. It was seen to be a kind of a discrimination, and the laws were changed in order to allow a greater equality from all over the world. How do you suggest that we go about discussing that, when really it seems what you're saying is that not all immigration groups are equal?
My late friend Roger Scruton was really very good at this, and he described the problems that the elites in the West either do not see or refuse to look at, which is on the cultural level. You have in the West, he's in this case describing, he's going from Britain to America to other Western cultures, and he's saying, we have made, when we established our nation states, we've actually come to an agreement about what is in the public sphere and what's in the private sphere. And we've relegated to the private sphere, what you do in your home and in your private sphere. We really don't say much about that. That's where your freedom lies. He describes freedom and tolerance in ways that I agree with, and I think that your audience will agree with. But in the public sphere, and he gives this example of wearing the burqa, for instance. In the public sphere, we've reached a place where we know as soon as you walk out of your house, this is how I am supposed to behave. And we show our faces. We look at each other in the eye. And there's a whole litany of things that we do, and we take it for granted that we do it, because that's taught in school, that's taught in the family, that's taught in the church, that's taught in associations. You just understand your place in the public sphere. So I'm going back to that cultural thing. Now, when you come from a Muslim society, you also have those norms and things that you understand that's inculcated into you. But then what happens when these two cultural systems collide? And what we are seeing is, with immigrants from Muslim countries, not all of them, but many of them, this collision is happening. And there is a demand from the Muslim side that is saying, the country that I come to, France, Britain, America, you name it, that country has to set aside its cultural norms, its norms in the open state, and mine will prevail. That is not going to work. And it's very, very important to have a conversation about that cultural space, those conflicting values, and whose values prevail, whose norms and laws prevail. And it's very interesting today that Emmanuel Macron is saying, well, ours are going to prevail. It's to be seen if he actually implements it. I've heard other world leaders say the exact same thing. I've listened to David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister of Britain, say multiculturalism is useless, it doesn't work, we've got to move on. And what we have here, it's all about British norms, British values. I've had to listen to Angela Merkel do the exact same thing. Multiculturalism doesn't work. I've had to listen to a prior Prime Minister of the Netherlands who went by the name Jan Balkenende, and he said, we are not a multicultural society. We're a multi-ethnic society, but we're a monocultural society. Boy, did he get attacked for it. But these leaders, national leaders, they said these things, but they didn't give it hands and legs. They didn't really carry it through. When I look back on that and what happened, why didn't they carry it through? Is that they were, they weren't able to explain and market and defend the philosophical underpinnings of the particular nation states. They just noted that, okay, well, if it's your culture and my culture, then my culture prevails. And then they left it at that after they were attacked. There was no persistence. And then everybody went back to talking about the practical problems. And once you descend into the practical problems, then it becomes a class issue where those who can sequester themselves from the practical, the things we talked about earlier, you know, they live in wealthy neighborhoods, the kids go to good schools, they have good healthcare and so on. Those groups, the higher classes say, I'm all for open borders. And the people who actually confront it with the unintended consequences of immigration will say, I'm against open borders, and then they are labeled xenophobic. But then what all groups avoid, then we have to keep going back to the philosophical. Why is it that one nation state, Israel, America, Britain, France, what is it really that makes them work? Why is it that people want to go there? What are the pull factors? Why is the country that I come from, and I was born in Somalia, why is it not working? See, when I listen to people shouting here, defund the police, abolish prisons, and so on, I almost want to say to them very gently, if that's really what you want, there is a country called Somalia. We don't have prisons. We don't have police. We don't, everything you want is there. Just go try it for about 3 months, 6 months, and report back. But the fact that we have police and we have prisons and we have law and order and we have elections and we have all of these things, that is not, it just didn't fall out of the air. They say, oh yeah, it's done on the back of slaves. And somehow we have to go back to ground zero and start all over again. I don't know, should we start all over again? Why not just go to countries where everything that Black Lives Matter is demanding right now is reality? Afghanistan, DRC, that's the so-called Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, Sierra Leone, Liberia. I mean, there are an endless number of countries that you could go and find any of the demands for the people who are saying open borders, nation states are Nazi, abolish the prisons, abolish the police, do this, that, and the other. I'll just say, go to Venezuela. It's not even that far. I'll pay for it.
Ayaan, you are one of the most elegant and eloquent defenders of liberalism that we have in the West today, and I certainly don't want to take it away from you. But I do want to push back and challenge just a little bit.
Okay.
Isn't there? I mean, this is the kind of question that conservatives have been asking liberals for decades, and we still need to talk about it. On the one side, you want to focus our attention on the nation state, which has its own unique traditions and its own unique public culture, and every one of them is going to be somewhat different from the others. On the other hand, and because of that, I think you're saying, or you're implying that that people who come from a country whose public culture is very different, they're going to be a problem. They may be a bigger or a larger problem, but they're a problem, and that problem may continue to get worse as the immigration gets larger. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's precisely the enlightened liberalism which became the dominant public culture in America and most Western countries, let's say by the mid-1960s, certainly after World War II. It's exactly that culture which says everyone is equal. It's unjust to treat people treat people from different groups differently, and here it seems that you're saying that that we don't have any choice if we want to save the freedoms and the public culture that we cherish in America or Britain or France or any democratic country. Then we don't have any choice but to retreat a little bit from liberal assumptions that every group is identical. How do you respond to that?
I respond to that by, first of all, refusing to talk about groups. And I think our common humanity begins with recognition of individuals as human beings. So that's the start. I want to say that, yes, on a philosophical and cultural and practical level, some countries, some nation states have done better than others. I disagree with the idea that we should not export those ideals. I don't think we should do it by force. But I do think we should market them. I think we should have very firm and frank conversations, tough love type of thing, to ask people who come from the places where it's just not working. So let's say right now, Ethiopia is in turmoil, right? They are having a crisis. If an Ethiopian refugee shows up in Israel or in America or in any part of Europe, I think the conversation we should be having with those individuals is, why are you here? The rich countries developed a philosophy of, well, you can come here and make a living here, but no philosophy of how can you make your country better. And if you then want to export the ideas of liberalism, tolerance, free markets, political freedom, all of those ideas and their philosophical underpinnings, they're derided. It's derision as, oh, that's, all white men and their philosophies, it's racist. We don't want that. I want something uniquely Ethiopian or uniquely Somali or uniquely Islamic or whatever. But that doesn't work. That still has your population going off to the white man's land. We've never had those honest conversations about what works and what doesn't and why. And as long as we don't talk about why does Israel work when it was only established officially in 1948. I know Israel's and the Zionist movement dates further, but why is it that works? And why doesn't Jordan work?
I would say that Israel works because it's not and never has been a liberal democracy in the sense that Americans or Europeans in the 1960s or 1970s meant it. Israel is a conservative democracy, and it is able. We of course cherish our minority populations. They have equal rights under the law. They serve in the military and the government in all branches, but the cohesion of the country comes from the fact that the population is overwhelmingly Jewish and committed to the idea of Israel as a Jewish state, and that dictates immigration policies that you know that in 1975 the United Nations voted and declared that Zionism is racism, that Israel is an inherently racist country. Now, when liberals or Marxists accuse Israel of racism, what they're saying is because of the fact that the country's public culture is Jewish, its norms are Jewish, and its immigration policies are set up in such a way that that we never take in very many people who are going to upset that structure. Now we have all across Europe and in America as well, we have people who write to me and to others who I know and ask the following question. They say, I live in Hungary. I would like for Hungary to be a Christian Hungarian country. I'm not against having any immigration, but I don't want large-scale immigration of people who don't want to live in a Christian Hungarian country. And you see that kind of example also in France and also in America and also in Britain. And the question is that step to saying, true, all of us believe in the freedom of the individual. That's a crucial part of our heritage. But part of the public order in our country, and I know you've spoken about this on numerous occasions, on the balance between freedom and order. Part of the public order in our country is that we try to keep a collective majority identity that is stable, and we expect other people to respect that, because that's how we hold our country together. So what do you think about that?
I am more comfortable giving answers to the tensions between Islam and the West, because I've given more thought to that and less thought to the tensions between a conservative democracy as opposed to, say, a liberal democracy. I've always thought of Israel as a liberal democracy. I've thought of countries like Hungary, Poland, as aspiring to be liberal democracies after they broke away from the Soviet Union. So I do have to read about and give some thought and discover what it is that a conservative democracy is. But I'm still in a place intellectually where I would call these democracies liberal democracies. And the reason why I would call them liberal democracies is because ultimately they value the freedom of the individual as long as the individual doesn't hurt or take away the freedoms of others, but that individual is able to worship or not worship, associate with whoever he or she wants. There's this aspiration of equality, not equality of outcomes. That's a very dangerous philosophy, but equality of opportunity. And then there's the rule of law. And so for me, all of that carries the label liberal. And I know the audience I'm speaking to right now is conservative, but still.
Well, we might have a few liberals watching.
Maybe you might want to clarify the way we use the term liberal in, say, in Britain versus the way we use the term liberal in America. In America, the label liberal is hijacked by these people who call themselves progressives, who really are just really, they're collectivists, they're communists, they're Marxists, they want big government. It's not what we call liberal in Europe.
Right. No, I agree with you. I certainly don't think that I think that the woke movement, the progressive movement that we're seeing rapidly advancing in America and in Britain and in other places is certainly not liberal. Liberalism as modern liberalism, as it was established in the West after World War II, is it's a public philosophy that emphasizes individual freedoms and equality. Really, I think above everything else. And when I say conservative, the only thing I mean is that conservative societies are not only based on those principles. They're also based on public norms which are explicitly religious or explicitly national, which create a a framework that then allows those liberties to exist. Let me ask you about your previous book, Heretic: Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now, because I think it directly relates to this question of liberalism and conservatism. In Heretic, which I recommend to everyone, it's really a fascinating book. You distinguish between radical Muslims, you call them Medina Muslims, who are willing to use violence to force universal Islam and Sharia law on anyone, on everyone, on the entire world, and more moderate Muslims that you call Mecca Muslims, who are who may have very traditional beliefs and ways and all sorts of and customs, but they are generally peaceful and not interested in imposing their way of life by force on other people. And you say that the overwhelming majority of Muslims between from Indonesia to Morocco are these more peaceful Mecca Muslims, as you call them. So what is it that troubles you? I mean, even though they're peaceful and they're not trying to impose their views on the rest of the world by violence, still you have criticisms.
My problem with the group I call Mecca Muslims, which is the largest group of Muslims, people who identify as Muslim, is there's a combination of apathy, fatalism. Things are going to go as God has willed them. I have nothing to do with it. I can't stop it. I'll be very concrete in this case. If you can see one of your children or a number of your children going down the radical path of the Medina Muslims, you can say as a mother, I see a change in my child. I see that he's being inspired by this particular imam, but he's reading the Quran, he's praying 5 times a day, he's trying to get other people to worship. So as a mother, I'm simply going to hold my tongue. But intuitively, you may feel that he's actually joining a group like the Muslim Brotherhood, and then graduating from the Muslim Brotherhood to Al-Qaeda, and then graduating from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. And as a parent, as a friend, as a community, you see this happening and you do nothing about it. And you say, I trust in God, I leave it to God. And then bad things happen. Your son goes and kills people, and you are saddened, you are outraged, you're confused, you're grieving all at once. And when you are confronted with this, you say, Islam is a religion of peace. My son misunderstood it, and he was misled by this particular imam or by that particular community. And so that, I would say, in a nutshell, is my problem with the Mecca Muslims. They let things happen and afterwards take no responsibility for it. You had this whole process that you saw unfolding before your eyes, and you didn't make any attempts to stop your child from doing what you thought was completely wrong. You didn't call the police. You didn't bring in other people. Now, I know that a lot of Mecca Muslims do that, but they don't have, and this is where I keep going back to principles and philosophies and stuff like that. When you're arguing, you're a father. I want you to sit down right now and imagine yourself being the Egyptian father of Muhammad Atta. Muhammad Atta is the guy who led the 19 men who brought down the Twin Towers. And he's embarking on that path. And after the fact, you say, I didn't know, it had nothing to do with Islam. Oh, and you've got the grieving confusion there. Let's replay the tape and say, what could you have done as a father? And what he will have a problem with is he'll never be able to sit down with his son and explain why it is wrong, because his son will say, Dad, you are wrong. See, this is what the Prophet Muhammad wants me to do. This is what it says in the Quran. This is what it says in the Hadith. This is what all the brave Muslims who have conquered continent after continent have done. And so the father is then rendered, he's rendered useless. He's silent. He doesn't know, he doesn't know what to say in return. And that's the Mecca Muslim. The Mecca Muslim is just, oh God, I don't know what to say. You know, he's right. The Prophet Muhammad was right. Can you ever say the Prophet Muhammad was wrong? What will happen to you if you say the Prophet Muhammad was wrong? Or if you say the Prophet Muhammad was right, but let's just view him in his context. What will happen to you as a Mecca Muslim? These are some of the conversations that are supposed to happen in intimate circles between father and son, mother and daughter, between friends, that are not happening. I'm putting my money on the people who get canceled because they're actually thinking. They're taking the trouble to think. They're taking the trouble to go through the cognitive dissonance. They are going to disappoint their parents, but not as badly as the guy who actually goes and kills people and blows people up. I disappointed my father. I disappointed my mother, but I speak to my mother because I'm alive. I haven't killed anyone. She's still confused. My father was confused by my behavior, by the choices I made. And he didn't like it when I said, I think the Prophet Muhammad was wrong. He was hurt, he was offended. But ultimately, his kid is still alive, whereas Muhammad Atta's father has to grieve the death of his son, the people he killed, and he's told, you know, you've been raising an evil person all this time.
Right. So a central part of your criticism of what you see as the majority of Muslims is the unwillingness to confront extremist violence, and but part of your criticism also has to do with other substantive issues like the treatment of women. Your own story is really remarkable. That your father, I think I can tell from your writing that you had great love and respect for your father and even his ideas, but then he arranges a marriage to someone that you don't want to marry, and you end up running away. Could you share a little bit about
Yes.
this?
I can share a little bit, and I want to go back to the respect and love. I mean, how you know, as a child, you respect and you love your parents. I respected and I loved my father, and when he said that I had to do something that I really didn't want to do, by the way, my father and mother were different in some ways. Where my mother was just, I don't care what you think, I don't care whether you like it or not, you just do it. But my father would sometimes say, okay, let's at least pretend that you're not supposed to obey. What is it that you don't want to obey? And I'd explain to him, I don't know this guy. We have nothing in common. I don't think we're going to have a happy marriage. It would get very sensitive because I would say, well, you know, you weren't there for my mother. She was alone all by herself. And when conversation gets to be that sensitive, what happens is avoidance. We both try to avoid it. But then when I get to the place of where my father thinks he has authority and he says, it doesn't matter whether this man and you get along. I could be wrong. I chose the wrong man for you. That's a possibility. But God said, and Muhammad said, and the minute I go to, I think I don't see eye to eye with the Prophet Muhammad, then you are wading into the waters of blasphemy.
I think one of the most touching moments in your book, Heretic, at least for me as a reader, is when you say, you know, I actually would have wanted a world where I could continue to believe in the God of my family. And I think if I understood what you were saying, you don't. The reason you refer to yourself as a heretic Muslim is that you still feel some kind of loyalty and bond with the Muslim world that prevents you from, I don't know, from saying, I'm going to go be a Christian, or I'm going to go be a Jew, or I'll be a liberal atheist, and I don't want to have anything to do with the Islamic world. But here there is some powerful connection that causes you to keep going back and fighting for what in this book, what you call the Reformation of Islam. Am I understanding it correctly?
I think you understand the bond, the strong bond. Absolutely. I feel bonded with my mother, even though in my conversations with her, we don't really have much in common in say, her lifestyle is very different from my lifestyle. But of course, I feel a strong bond towards her. She's my mother. I feel a strong bond towards which I came, I came from. Somalis. I listen to Somali music to this day. I feel I will never call myself a Muslim because I do not submit to the will of Allah, but I have a bond with people who are Muslims because there are so many traditions and practices and customs and things that I recognize and in some ways value. But what I find unfortunate is that individuals like myself are forced to break away from the bond because of the threats and the use of violence. If I were able to be an atheist in Somalia, I would travel to Somalia all the time and be with my fellow clanmates, and we would talk about our youth and enjoy ourselves. I'd be in Ethiopia, I'd be in Kenya. And the only reason why I'm not there is because of the threat to my life. And I think Christianity, Judaism, conservatism, I think that they have moved on. They've moved on. People are no longer threatened with violence because of what they believe. I'll see what the woke do. They're flirting with violence. But the other traditions don't, as far as I can tell.
I think there's definitely something to that argument that Christian societies and Jewish societies, at least most of the ones that I'm familiar with, it's true that of course every culture has its extremists and its fanatics, but I can speak about Orthodox Jewish society that I live in. If somebody is taking up violence, murder to try to advance what are supposed to be religious, a religious point of view or a political religious point of view, then there will be condemnation of. Yes. There will be condemnation from, the overwhelming majority of Orthodox Jews, and I think that this is probably true in most Christian countries. They'll condemn murderous religious violence that's in the name of the religions. But when I read about the idea of a reformation in Islam, I have to admit that I hesitate. One possibility, which I brought up in my recent book, is that the Bible, at the basis of Christian and Jewish society, has had over thousands of years. It's had certain kinds of effects, and Islam does not have the Bible, even though it's in a way descended from Judaism, but Islam decided at a very early stage that the Hebrew Bible, what the Christians call the Old Testament, is corrupt and is not a holy text for Muslims. There are very basic things like the idea that all men and women are created in God's image, which enters Western tradition only from the Bible, and there is no Greek or Roman source for it. Or the ideal of national independence and peace among independent nations, that has no Greek and Roman source. It only exists in the West because of the Bible. And so I certainly hope for improved conditions for your friends and family and for all Muslims, but it's difficult for me to see how, without the Bible as the foundation, how that can happen.
The clarity that the Quran has and the Old Testament and the Bible lack. The Old Testament, and especially the New Testament, they provide you with enough ambiguity for everybody to say, well, this is exactly how I live this way, and I'm a Christian, and I'm still a Christian. I have my own little church, let's live each other in peace. The Quran doesn't do that. In some ways, the clarity is just too clear. And you're put in a position as an individual in the 21st century to either endorse that clarity or not endorse it. If you don't endorse it, you're a heretic, you're an infidel, And I think that's baked into the cake, and it's unfortunate. Can I say, in what I try to do in the book Heretic, what I try to grapple with is that maybe there is a way to be loyal to the Quran and to call yourself a Mecca Muslim or a Medina Muslim, in which case you take the experience of the Prophet Muhammad when he was in Mecca and he was preaching peace to others, etc. And you can say, I'm a Muslim, I read the Quran, it's still valuable for me, but I'm a Mecca Muslim. And if I'm a Mecca Muslim, I want to live in peace with my fellow Muslims and with non-Muslims. And then maybe you separate it from the Prophet Muhammad's experience in Medina and you say, I'm on a war footing with everyone.
Let's go to this topic we talked about for a couple of minutes before the show. America has been through really a terrible year. And, I know people don't agree about what was terrible about it, but I think we can all agree that America is a very great nation, very impressive, very important, not only to Americans, but to many other people in the world. And still at this point, it looks like its national unity, its national cohesion, its ability even to have democratic elections that will be accepted by the public appears to be fraying and disintegrating. Yeah. And at the same time that this is happening, we're also seeing the old liberalism that that was the dominant political worldview. Some people would even say political religion, but let's say political worldview in America, at least since the 1960s, is under severe strain, not so much from conservatives as from this new woke, I would say, neo-Marxist worldview, which proved during this during the summer that it is capable of extending its worldview and enforcing it in former liberal institutions like the New York Times or like Princeton University, or major corporations that used to be run by liberals, and today they are under the thumb of this racialist neo-Marxist ideology. And you've talked about this quite a bit. You've spoken about it quite a bit. I want to ask you in particular about the question of whether it's going to be possible for liberals and conservatives to join forces to resist this. I think many leading liberals are not ready for that. They continue to see conservatives as the enemy and nationalists as the enemy, and maybe they even think that they can find a way to get along with the woke ideology. What do you think?
And I think that even the liberals and conservatives think at times that they are an existential threat to one another, they're not. Now, when you are faced with, for instance, the Islamist threat, I remember that the conservative reaction was, it's philosophical, this is about conviction, we've got to stop it, and here are some of the concrete steps we need to take. And the liberals disagreed because they said, what about civil rights? What about civil liberties? What about this? What about that? I don't know if you remember it, but I remember vividly Guantanamo Bay, habeas corpus, all that sort of thing. Now, that was an external threat with this philosophy that now goes by the umbrella name of woke. It's an internal threat. And it's even more confusing. What should you do? Conservatives say, well, let's just quash it. Liberals say, why don't we appease and see what happens? What are they saying? They're saying there are social justice issues to be looked at. Okay, let's look at them. There are inequalities. These inequalities are racial, gender, sexual, whatever. Let's look at it. Now, what I'm seeing with my liberal friends and my conservative friends, yes, I acknowledge the awareness is there. We acknowledge that these disparities are there and we have to take action. But then we're seeing, I think, on the conservative side, something more interesting and more complex, where in fact the woke are saying, oh, we don't just want to fix the disparities, we want to bring the whole system down. And that's where the conservatives say, we're not going to let that happen. And the liberals now are very confused because they thought appeasement would help. Give them something, it would help, and it's not. Give them something, appeasement emboldens. And now we're getting ever more outlandish and outrageous demands. Abolish ICE, defund the police, add 2 states to the union. There's just madness after madness after madness, these demands. And the liberals think that they can contain it. They can contain it. And they're seeing, at least some of them are seeing, and this last election is giving us the empirical outcome that needs to get conservatives and liberals back to be together and fight against the woke together, is that appeasement actually doesn't help. Appeasement emboldens. This is an absolute ideology, and absolutism demands absolute outcomes, but they are not going to have it. So at some point, we're going to have a confrontation with the woke. I don't know what the New York Times is going to do. I don't know what Biden and Harris are going to do, and the wider Democratic moderate party leaders. But we have this problem. It's very concrete. And one word of optimism. I have seen conservatives right now and liberals work together who understand the problem, who are saying, this is something we all have to, we actually have to unite to address it and get it out of our universities, get it out of our schools, get it out of our corporations, get it out of our newsrooms. But that combined voice of liberals and conservatives is still very small. We also, only yesterday, I saw a letter at Stanford having us, some of us, do these racial bias courses. So there is, the woke have made inroads that are very real and threatening and frightening. And now I think it's up to us to push back. I've got a letter from the headmaster of my child's school asking me to read Ibram X. Kendi. Come on.
Wow.
You know, I know.
Incredible.
But so they've made these inroads, and I'm in touch with a number of doctors across the country, especially doctors who treat women, and they're saying they're baffled by some of the things that are being imposed on them in the name of race. There are nuclear scientists who are being told that science is whiteness. It's interesting. It's interesting to watch. As I sit here, I want to say to you, wokeism to me is not as frightening as radical Islam. The only reason is radical Islam has been around for a very long time. It's, potentially got an audience of 1.5 billion people over 5 or more continents. And wokeism is still literally a spoiled white woman's hobby horse.
Ayaan Hirsi, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining us on NatConTalk.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of NatConTalk. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss us next time.